Hello, everybody, and welcome to Perspectives. Glad you're with us today. We've got several things I think are going to be of pretty solid interest, things you'll want to know about. But first, I'm going to preach a minute. You already know what our brothers and sisters are going through in the California fires. You already know that they're just dazed. They're living in the streets, some cases. There are volunteers coming from every state in the union to help them. People who can cook, people who are bringing food to cook, people who started a clothing drive, all kinds of things are underway. Now, with a tragedy like this, the worms come out of the woodwork. We also have people that are trying to get your money. They want you to send your money to them so they can, quote, distribute it the way it should be distributed. Do not fall for that. If you have any doubts about what to do with your dollars, your hard-earned income, and you want to donate it to the victims of the California fires, might I suggest, go through your church or your synagogue or your mosque. More often than not, the leaders of those three organizations will know exactly where the money should go, how to get it to the folks who can do the most good with it, and nobody takes anything out of it. Everybody works very hard to get things underway and where they're supposed to be. So don't be sucked in by politicians that say, send the money to us and we'll get it there. And by that, I mean former office holders. A couple of them are already out there beating the drum for the dollar, and I don't want you to fall for that because those dollars will not end up where they're supposed to. Now, let's get down to the business at hand, because today's episode is going to open with Katie Dilks, who's Executive Director of the Oklahoma Access to Justice Foundation. And what is that, Katie?
Thanks for having me, Sam. I'm really excited to be here. The Oklahoma Access to Justice Foundation is a small nonprofit that works in civil justice. So we like to say that we're trying to improve meaningful access in a fair and accessible civil justice system. And if you sort of take that a step at a time, we're trying to make sure that our courts and legal systems work for the people who need them, when they need them, in a way that they can afford, understand, and truly use. And when we're thinking about civil justice, it's really everything people need our legal system for that's not getting arrested, right? We don't touch criminal. We've got a ton of people in the state who do really effective criminal justice reform, but we're talking about housing law, family law, guardianship, divorce, disputes with neighbors, small claims, debt. All of those things fall in the civil justice system, and we're just trying to make sure that systems actually work for people.
That covers a lot of ground.
Sure does.
I did not know until I looked at some of the advance information I got from you that we have such a drastic shortage of affordable places to live.
Yeah.
And it's not just Tulsa, it's all over the country, isn't it?
Yeah, we've spent a lot of time over the past several years working on eviction and eviction response specifically because it has such dramatic impacts on folks' lives, safety, stability. And our eviction crisis in this state stems, I think, from a lot of different causes, but one of those causes absolutely is just our shortage of available affordable housing. Some estimates across the state right now are that we're 77,000 units short of the affordable housing that we need to make sure that everybody can actually have a place to live that they can afford.
Does Oklahoma have a law in place? I know California does, where people who have affordable places to live suddenly jack up their prices?
Oh, like a rent control law?
Yeah.
We do not have a rent control law. No, there's anything determining rent is just a contract between a landlord and a tenant, and they can set it at whatever they think people will be willing to pay.
So no one from the legislature has stepped up to take
Not
this
on that issue, no.
Not on that, okay. There's a thing called an eviction lab. What is that?
So Eviction Lab is out of Princeton University, and they have been studying the impacts of eviction, the demographics of eviction, the causes of eviction, and some of the ways that we maybe could stem the flood of eviction really that our country sees for the past several years. Matthew Desmond, who people may know is the author of Evicted and recently the author of Poverty by America, heads up that lab and has really spearheaded a lot of the research around eviction that we've been able to build on over the past decade or so. They published some rankings of cities across the country in 2016 based on their eviction rates. And in that, Tulsa was number 11 in the country in terms of our eviction rate, and Oklahoma City was number 20.
When you have children involved, that really scrambles their little marbles, doesn't it? I mean, what happens to a child mentally? Well, erase that. What happens to a child, period, when, and I'm assuming here, the majority of the folks who are evicted are either single parent, single mothers. What happens to that child down the road when he or she is forced to go through repeated evictions?
Yeah, it has huge impacts. We know it negatively impacts their health. We know it negatively impacts academic outcomes. Often kids struggle to finish school because they may be having to change schools multiple times even within a year. So it's really hard to build those trusted relationships with your teachers or with your school communities. But we also know from some of the research that the Eviction Lab and others have done that people tend to move to less safe neighborhoods and less safe housing. Every time you're evicted, it's usually a downgrade in the quality of your living circumstances, which also then contributes to those health concerns, those academic concerns, and other things, in addition to just losing your friends and neighbors and the social support network you might have around you.
Not to mention the slow development of that child in terms of mental development. There's food insecurity involved here. How does one beat back the forces of evil, if you will, on this eviction problem? If it's not just here, it's everywhere.
It is everywhere, but it's not consistent everywhere. So I think that's actually a really interesting thing we can look at is what states have higher and lower eviction rates and what are the things that lead to that. Because the answer, honestly, is policy, right? There are policy choices that lead to direct relationships on eviction rates. It does tie in often with demand for apartments, sort of what your supply availability is, but it's also directly tied to things like the eviction filing fee, what the timeline is for eviction. Our eviction filing fee is $58, and it's been $58 since 2003. It's one of the cheaper filing fees in the country. And when they've done research on this, they find a pretty direct connection between filing fee and eviction rate. When it costs more to file an eviction, landlords are less likely to do it.
You mentioned that there's a high and a low involved in this statistically. Who has the lowest eviction rate in the country?
Oh, I think it's Connecticut, if I'm remembering correctly. But it's not just a sort of a demographic thing where, you know, maybe the richer states have lower eviction rates, or maybe the more progressive states that we think of would have lower rates. Alabama actually has really low eviction rates. And
Really?
one of the reasons Alabama has really low eviction rates is because it costs $300 to file an eviction in Alabama. So landlords there try every other tool at their disposal to try to work something out with the tenant before resorting to an eviction.
And do you know off the top of your head who has the highest?
I believe at last count, the highest rate was Maryland. And again, it's because of their filing fee. Up until just last year, it cost $15 to file an eviction in Maryland. And it meant you had some apartment complexes that had 300% filing rates, where basically every single person in that complex would get filed on multiple times in a year.
No kidding. I had no idea the problem was this vast and this widespread.
Yeah.
Any idea on numbers of children involved? How many are we talking about?
It can be a little hard to measure because we don't have a great demographic data tied up with our court data, but there's actually a really fascinating project that's been happening in Tulsa, led by Impact Tulsa, that has looked specifically at Tulsa Public School data and cross-referenced that with court records. And what they've found based on that alert system is that over about a 3.5-year period, just over 4,000 evictions were filed on households containing TPS kids. It was about 2,900 individual children who were impacted by those filings. The reason you've got that discrepancy between the number of filings and the number of kids is that obviously you have some households with multiple kids, but you also had a lot of households with multiple filings.
Do you have a website?
I do. Ours is okaccesstojustice.org.
So they can just go to that and probably learn a heck of a lot more than
Absolutely. We actually wrote a research report 2 years ago on eviction that has a lot of this information as well.
Well, first of all, thank you for coming in to kind of open our eyes to it. I wish I hadn't heard this. I wish I didn't.
Yeah.
I won't go to bed tonight thinking about it, because I will, but I'll especially go to bed thinking about the children. That's criminal.
Yeah.
Absolutely criminal.
Yeah.
Listen, thank you for coming by.
Thank you for having me. I was really happy to be
Maybe
here.
down the road, if things start to change one way or the other, could you come back?
Absolutely. Happy to.
You're on. We're going to take a short break. We'll be back with more right after this.